Welcome to Below the Line with Dr. Bennie Harris. The Chancellor of the University of South Carolina Upstate talks with top leaders about issues such as change, technology, education, and leadership. Please enjoy.
Welcome to Below the Line. This is a monthly podcast that I have where I do question and answering with a distinguished leader. And so, retired Chief Justice Don Beatty, welcome. And thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this podcast, Below the Line.
The pleasure is mine, and thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. So I've sent you a series of questions, and I try to be extremely respectful to stay with those questions, but occasionally you may say something that may cause me to pivot. And I'm very generous in editing stuff out if you decide that you don't want something that we talk about to be in there, but that rarely happened because this is really about leadership.
Well, that wouldn't be a problem for me. I kind of welcome the conversation, the discussion, especially about leadership, and I assume the leadership questions will have some impact on what's going on. I should say going on in our community, locally as well as nationally. So,
Thank you. So you grew up attending segregated schools in South Carolina, upstate, South Carolina's during the Civil Rights Movement and the Jim Crow South. Can you tell me a bit about that experience and how it shaped you for the future?
Quite frankly, I would have to say that experience is the reason why I became a lawyer and moved to the bench. It was, I don't want to say unique because everyone who grew up in that time along the same age as me shared the same experience. Mm-hmm. It was one that made you understand that perseverance was necessary, that you had to be strong to survive, and you did what you had to make it.
Okay. So as you reflect on that time period and now, what are some key lessons or characteristics that you developed out of that space to the person you are today? How did that shape you?
Well, it taught me how to deal with people, to read people, to understand situations, the complexities of interpersonal relationships, and how I needed to respond accordingly.
Okay.
What I see as it relates to now, going back, looking at that time in our country's history, in this state's history, as a matter of fact, I see now, although there's been progress, that we are retrogressing, if you will. Yeah. We're going back to, we won't get back to that same place, but we're going to get, as if some people have their way, as close as possible to that.
Okay. We may be able to speak to that a little more later. But you graduated, as we talk about you growing up, you graduated from South Carolina State University, and then you enrolled in the University of South Carolina Law School. Why did you choose to pursue a career in law?
That harkens back to your first question.
Right.
Growing up in segregated South Carolina during the 70s, 60s, as I did, that kind of pointed me in that direction because a lot of the things that I had a problem with or saw problems with during that time, in my mind, could be rectified by using the law. Uh-huh. And that directed me in that direction. I'll have to admit that was not my first intention. My intention was to go to med school.
Okay.
But the older I got, the more my eyes opened to the world and to see what was going on around me, and I thought I could be more impactful in the legal arena.
Okay. Have you ever thought about writing about how all that shaped your life and your whole memoir? Because you have a really, really distinguished history.
I thought about it more than once, and honestly, I've written little things that I've compiled over the years, mm-hmm. and I probably will.
Okay.
I probably will.
So for several years, you served as an officer in the U.S. Army. Then you finished law school. You spent 2 years with what was then called the Neighborhood Legal Assistance Program in Conway, South Carolina, providing help to residents unable to afford legal representation. When did you learn, or what did you learn from the military service and from working in the legal representation program? What are some key lessons you learned?
Again, it was about people.
Okay.
I learned to listen, one thing, to understand the nature of the situation or the problem I was dealing with so that I could somehow come up with a solution if I could. Uh-huh. Military taught me leadership, discipline.
Okay.
The stick-to-itness, if you will, to get a job done, to understand mission accomplishment, mission objectives, and what's the difference between the mission, an objective, and a goal. And that was important, I thought. Neighborhood Legal Assistance Program, I made a decision when I went to law school that I would devote at least the first 4 or 5 years to public service.
Okay.
And so I would not even pursue a job with some of the larger firms or corporate jobs in that thing because I wanted to do something for the community. And along those lines, I started preparing while I was in law school. I could have finished law school a little earlier than I did. I finished in 3 years, but probably could have finished in 2.5.
Okay.
Quite frankly.
Still ambitious.
But I spent that extra time volunteering with the Legal Services Corporation. And I did that for 2 summers.
What are some situations or a couple cases that may just stick with you that you had a chance to impact during that time? Are there anything that you can think about?
Restate that, please.
Think about during that time and during that service,
Mm-hmm.
are there any particular situation that you were able to impact or were involved in that just kind of sticks with you?
Honestly, no, and I'll tell you why that's difficult to answer. The whole experience was one that was laden with problems,
Okay.
crises for this person, that person. So it's difficult to say one was more important than the other, or one was more impactful than the other. A good day for me was to go home and say, at the end of the day, say, well, I got that done. And you don't think about it, you push it aside, you move on to the next. So it's kind of difficult to pinpoint one particular situation that might have been that impactful. In fact, I have that problem now after having been a judge for 28, 29 years in the legal profession for more than 40. It's difficult now to say point to one thing that I say was highlighted in my career.
Okay. Yeah, and you know that's interesting. I'm going to digress just a little because upon your retirement, I talked to you about an initiative we were starting here at the University of South Carolina Upstate with working with our students to help encourage them in the legal profession. So we established, was approved by our Board of Trustees and our Commission on Higher Education for the state of South Carolina to establish the Center for Justice and Society, where it takes our students, help to amplify their service experience with people in the community, whether it's legal services, whether it's public services, et cetera. And you were generous to allow us to name the center.
No, I was honored.
Well, I think you were being very generous, and we were happy to honor you. The Chief Justice Don Beatty Center for Justice and Society. And so we use that as a place to really develop future lawyers, future public servants. What lessons do you want to resonate, particularly out of that particular center, that you would believe is a legacy lesson for you to transfer to these students?
Well, that we each have a commitment to our community.
Okay.
To make it successful, to make it livable. We have a commitment to society. Without lawyers, there will be no society.
Okay.
Lawyers keep things in balance. Much as some people say they don't like lawyers, they hate lawyers. You hear politicians say it all the time. Yeah. But I can guarantee you, each and every one of them has a lawyer speed dial on their cell phones. Mm-hmm. And so lawyers keep the balance. We right wrongs where there's indifferences. We are swords as well as the shield. Yeah. We keep things going. We are a necessary part of our society. In fact, we talk about this country and this founding. Most of the people attending the Constitutional Convention were lawyers, yeah. Or at least the drafters, at least I think 30 of them.
Okay.
So it's important. I might have that number wrong, but the lawyers were the major impetus for the Constitution. So.
And that's interesting, and it's appropriate that you say, because when you look at our country, we have 3 branches of government. And out of all the different industries, one of them is a judiciary branch to help have a balance of government and balance of law and society. So that really emphasized the importance of the legal framework for society.
Yeah, our society is balanced on a 3-legged stool. Mm-hmm. The judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. And if either one of those legs fall or for whatever reason is injured, then that stool is not balanced, and whoever sits on that stool or whatever sits on that stool, that table or whatever it might be, will eventually tilt over.
Right.
So those things have to stay in balance, and for whatever reason, we've not been able to do that.
Okay. So your political
Lately.
career. Go ahead. Huh?
I want to turn this off.
Okay. Thank you. Your political career started in about 1988. So we started from really your judiciary experience. Now you're in this legislative, from a political perspective. Why shift into politics? And what was it that drove you into that politics?
Politics control the way the world go around.
Okay.
I learned that early in life, watching politicians, watching what was going on in our community, and trying to figure out a solution to some of the problems.
Okay.
I realized it had to be done politically. And politics usually are controlled by lawyers, well, it used to be anyway, not nowadays. Lawyers are reasonable people. Lawyers are people who understand the ins and outs of things, and where they can go and where they can't go and where they should go and shouldn't go. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people in politics now who don't understand politics, don't understand what it takes to keep a community going, a society level and balance. And that's what lawyers do. But in any event, I got into politics because I saw that was the solution to some of the problems.
Okay.
And I've enjoyed it. I love politics,
Okay.
quite frankly. And I intend to, at some point in time, not necessarily be a politician, so to speak, but be involved in politics very heavily.
Okay. I think it's needed. I think we're in a society right now where the globe, needs politicians who are going to help bring together folks versus being more divisive around boundaries and lines, and you see a lot of that. I think it discourages young people from going to politics. I'm hoping the center, the Beatty Center, will have some conversations with students about careers in politics.
That would be a major goal of mine. People need to understand the necessity to be involved in their community and being involved in what makes their community work, if you will, what makes a society. And I don't think you could do that without serious discussion, and that institute, if you will, the center would be a place for that.
Yeah, I think so. Well, not think of that's the intent of it. That's definitely the intent of it. What I also love about it being in higher education, when I think about your career, your history, particularly during your growing up, it was young people, young adults, very young adults, who helped to shape and to lead and had the courage to do what was necessary to bring about change, whether it's political change, whether it was societal change. I think it's a great opportunity to help students see their civic responsibility.
Civic responsibility. You know, it's unfortunate now that we don't teach civics in school.
Yeah.
And I tell you, it's amazing. How do you expect young people to understand society, community, what makes a good one, what makes it work, without understanding civics?
Yeah.
You have people complaining about this, complaining about that, talking about this, even talking about the Constitution, Second Amendment, if you will, First Amendment, if you will, and never read the Constitution.
Yeah. I grew up under, they used to call them Schoolhouse Rock growing up.
I remember Schoolhouse Rock.
And we used to talk about how a bill was made, kind of conjunctions, et cetera, but I can think about it's just a bill, it's only a bill on Capitol Hill. And then I also remember in 8th grade, I had a dedicated civics class. I think we'll put so much on our educational systems that we have forced out things that really made for great citizenship to try to get people through quickly. And I think we're
That's
losing
unfortunate.
things. I think we're losing something.
That was detrimental to society. Yeah. And it behooves us to get that back into schools. Yeah. If people really understood civics, I don't think we'd have half the problems that we're having now. Yeah. If people understood what government is or what government isn't, and what government should do and shouldn't do, then I think we would not have the divisiveness that we have now.
I agree 100%. I really do. I know part of the curriculum, I know this is a long time ago, and it's easy for old folks to reminisce back as
Now, I'm older than you, so I can go a little bit further back.
But civics, there we had to learn all 82 counties and county seats in the state of Mississippi. We had to learn how bills were formed. We had to learn all of those things. And I don't think young people, our curriculum are really making that a required for people to know where you are, how we came together as a country, how we will operate as a municipality. None of that is taking place.
It's unfortunate. You know, recognizing that was a problem, we started a program at the Supreme Court when I was Chief Justice, where we took the court on the road to visit schools where we held terms. Matter of fact, we held a term of court right here.
Right.
And that program, I tell you, has really just taken off. We have a waiting list now of institutions, cities even, that want the Supreme Court to come and hold a term of court. And doing that, we just don't have the oral arguments. We send to the students copies, or at least a small, short, I won't say an executive summary, but a short explanation of what the case is about, the kind of issues we're going to be talking about, and we entertain questions. Mm-hmm. We also have a session at the Supreme Court where we bring schools in, classes, and allow them to sit during the term of court right there in Columbia and do a question and answer. And then we have an educational program for teachers that we bring in to do the same thing. But getting back to secondary schools, we had a program, and we started what we call them comic books, but they have some kind of graphic novels, I believe is the term that's used now for them. Well, we started a program that would show you, teach young people how government works, how the judicial system works, what happens to a trial, what happens with the charge, what happens with the bill through the legislature, things what you're talking about. We did, when I say we, I'm talking about the National Center of State Courts and the Conference of Chief Justices, put all of this together, and we circulated them around the country to schools that wanted them. Yeah. And we've used them quite a bit here in South Carolina.
I think that's important. I know when you came to USC Upstate, I wasn't here at the time, but it's still talked about. It was extremely impactful, and we're going to see if we can make that happen again. So you made history being appointed to the South Carolina Supreme Court, and ultimately as its Chief Justice. Did this honor hold a lot of sway for you, or was it more of a reminder of the inequity or the lack of diversity in our system?
You know, that's a very interesting question. And I say interesting because it was like a bittersweet kind of thing, sauce, if you will. At times it was frustrating. At times it kind of made you smile and say, we did something good here. But honestly, in the last 4 or 5 years, it became more frustrating than illuminating. And that's when I recognized that politics had gotten too much involved in the judicial system, in justice, in the courts. And it's getting worse, quite frankly. I think we worked hard at trying to keep it out, but I think it's too far now. It's too far gone, not only in our Supreme Court in South Carolina, but the U.S. Supreme Court as well, and Supreme Courts around the country. Politics generally, and unfortunately, control.
And that's unfortunate, because even as I think about the flavor of what's happening right now, Americans are putting a lot of hope in our judiciary right now.
I wouldn't.
And we're not seeing what we were hoping would expect, because it is extremely political, very partisan right now.
It is, but there's hope. Now, don't mistake me to say that every judge, justice on the courts, not only in South Carolina or across the nation, are controlled by politics, if you will, is controlled by politics, if you will. That's not the case. We have some good people on these courts. I mean, very intelligent people, people who have resisted the sway of political pressure. But then we have others who are talented, competent people who have succumbed to the pressure of politics. And that does not help our system. It does not help society. It actually makes things worse, in my opinion.
You know what? I imagine when a judge, particular justice, Supreme Court justice, take on that role or take that oath of office, that there's a transformation within him or her, that this is an awesome responsibility, and I hold in my hand the responsibility for society. for balance, for doing everything I can to be as objective. I just kind of feel that for many takes place psychologically, if nothing, emotionally.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And my time on the court and interacting with jurists, people, lawyers that I've known for a long time, and to see them in a totally different light than what I thought, it was, I'll tell you, enlightening, informative. But what you say is absolutely correct. When a judge or takes the oath of office, that oath, you swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of South Carolina and the Constitution of the United States, and all those things and where those constitutions have been interpreted. But over the years, you get a situation where politics somehow
find its
way in, and unfortunately, it has to do with how people are elected, who pays for the elections, and that kind of a thing.
Okay. So I have a question about your departure left the South Carolina Supreme Court with only white judges, and I don't want to have a DEI conversation, but what is your take on the importance of everybody who's qualified and capable to participate, bringing that to the judiciary at that level?
Let me qualify whatever I might say after this with this statement. South Carolina has some of the best judges in this country on every level of our court. Over the years that I've been involved as a judge, if you will, I've had the occasion to travel this country, to visit its colleges, its law schools, its courts, and to be in conference with its judges from all over. And I will put any judge in South Carolina up against any judge from any other state on any other court.
Okay.
Our people are just that good. And you go to the National Judicial College, you see these other judges in action, and you see, oh yeah, we're better than them, that kind of thing. But having said that, diversity is important on our courts, and especially on our courts. Now, and as an example, being the only person of color on our court, Supreme Court, even on our Court of Appeals that I sat on before, and one of the few, I won't say few, for a few in number, if you will, on our trial bench at the time when I came around. What you learn is that the majority members of the bench have no real understanding, no clue in some instances of the behavior of African Americans, Hispanics, or anyone else, any other minority. If you're not within that majority, they've not had time to spend with you. They don't understand you. They don't know you. Little gestures like in our community, we might nod our head to acknowledge you.
Right.
But depending upon the situation, if I were to do that to you, and supposedly there's some allegation out that we are doing this, then I've given you some signal to commit a crime. I mean, that's something as simple as that. Or let me go a little bit deeper than that. In the law, especially criminal law, we're talking about the reasonable man standard.
Okay.
Well, unfortunately, the reasonable man standard is the reasonable white man's standard. So if any given situation, we are expected to act the same, notwithstanding the stimuli that's involved in that particular situation. We are expected to act as a white person would act in a police stop. We are not supposed to be nervous. We're not supposed to perspire. We're not supposed to do any of those things at a police stop. If we are,
there's a suspect that
then we're suspected
of something.
Yeah, we're doing those things.
Theory.
We're suspected of having committed a crime. Well, they don't understand that our history, even policemen, and most black folk know this, policemen came about as a means of controlling black folk, slaves. I mean, that's where the police force emanates from. And that history, that 400-year history of dealing with policemen and how they react with us, that controls or impacts how we behave in certain situations. Well, my counterparts have no clue and had no clue. I've had so many discussions with them, and our conversations are conferences, we call them, or in private. I know outsiders there, and you can listen to them talk and listen to their responses and how they explain things, and you say, they have no clue that that's normal behavior for us. That's how we are taught to react in certain situations.
Right.
And, well, that's why diversity is important.
And there are so many different angles you can take with the conversation of the diversity of this country. For example, we went through a lot of work to make sure that women have the same opportunities as men, right? And so naturally, if you now in higher education, you have probably 60% women attending school and 40% men, there are more qualified women in the pool than black. That is not a diversity hire. That is what the objective of what we sought to accomplish by being more given the same
Opportunities to everyone.
To everyone. So when we went from affirmative action to equal employment opportunity, recognizing to achieve equal employment opportunity, we had to affirmatively act to open doors for others that had been closed. You're going to have more qualifications in the pool now. And unfortunately, though, as those qualifications gets hired, they get labeled as diversity hires.
Yeah.
And they're more qualified.
Yeah.
And they have achieved what we as Americans said is the American promise.
Every time I hear that diversity hire, the DEI conversation, the complaints about that, and we're going to become a meritocracy now. Everything's going to be based on merit. I have to laugh internally, and I don't do it often, but I do. I mean, where did the saying, it's not what you know, but who you know, come from? Why does that saying exist?
Yeah.
So now if merit was so important, we wouldn't use that phrase. It's not what you know, but who you know. Well, the truth of the matter is, that's the truth.
Yeah. Well, it was highlighted when all of the lawsuits that took place with admissions. You saw all the very rich parents, kids were going to these top Ivy schools and had nothing to do with merit. It just had to do with who had the ability to pay to get them in.
Absolutely.
So that was highlighted. And the blanket was pulled back on all of that stuff in some ways, and you saw what you always knew to be the case.
And every time I hear that statement, I look at the person who's making the statement. And oftentimes I go back and take a look at the person specifically. And come to find out, I mean, it's laughable that person is even making that statement.
Yeah. So I understand that when time permits, you try to speak at schools and to youth groups about values, scholarships, and about leadership. One of my primary motivators in helping young people reach their greatest potential too. But what are your goals when you're talking to students today?
In my opinion, children, young people, I should say, and they're children to me. I'm 72 years old, so they're children to me. Have lost, or maybe have not had the necessity or pushed, if you will, to understand that it's important to work hard, to understand what's going on around you, to have goals in life, to work toward those goals, and make an effort to be successful. And now, in my opinion, young people have gotten too comfortable with the status quo, thinking that everything is okay, everything is fine, and I don't have to do this or I don't have to do that if I want to succeed. Well, they need to start paying attention to the news now and just see whether or not that's important. I want to instill in young people that it's important, indeed necessary, that they prepare for their future and how they need to do that, what steps they need to take. I think that's important to do. And I spend time when I'm talking to young people talking about those kinds of things.
Okay. How do you bridge the intergenerational gap? Because
it's hard, especially for someone my age. It's really hard. I've gotten to the point now that I don't like talking to really young kids, if you will, and about real things.
Mm-hmm.
I can talk to them about things, but not really. I figure I'm too old now.
Okay.
I don't relate well.
Okay.
If I'm talking about the kinds of issues that are important to me that I think they should know about, and trying to relate them to people that small. When I say small kids, I'm talking elementary school, 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, that kind of a thing. Maybe 10, 12 up, I think I do a better job with.
Yeah. You know, some societies particularly have very defined roles for their elders to carry the stories of the past on and on and on. I don't think we as a society have that type of construct. So our young people miss a very important part of our history, their history, because we don't have that type of deference to our eldership, where we would sit and listen to them. I used to remember my Medea, we used to call her Medea, telling us stories about her past, or my grandfather telling us a story, and we treasured those types of things. But I don't see the young people treasuring those types of moments.
They don't, and they say, oh, no, that's so long ago, that's not happening now, that's not important now. That's not true.
Yeah.
It is very important now to listen and to understand what has happened so that you know what to do right now, today.
Yeah. Our history in America is so contemporary. When you think about European history, you're talking about thousands of years of history that they still play out in their lives, whether you look at British history or Scottish history or Irish, et cetera. But in the U.S., history is very, very contemporary, and people still think it's way, way back there when this was during our time in some ways. So this whole podcast is named Below the Line. And what is below the line actually means is that much of leadership takes place below the line. You don't know what's actually happened. There's a lot at play. It's like that iceberg effect. You see the iceberg, but up under is where the mass actually happened. How do you lead knowing that most of what people are thinking through or what's going to make a difference in their lives happens below the line, and you don't know what's below the line?
You have to make an effort to find out what's below the line. That's why I got into politics. That's where all of the decisions were being made. Those committee meetings, if you will, those personal meetings of, I don't play golf, but those on the golf course.
You don't play golf?
No, I stopped many years ago. I have bad back. So
I've been trying to play,
left
so I
it
may
alone.
not even get started. I've been trying. Go ahead.
But that's where the below the line information resides. And you have to find a way to put yourself in those situations where you can find out those things. And unfortunately, most of us either are not interested or even don't know that we ought to be interested in doing just that. And since I've retired, I've made a big effort in getting back into the community so I can get below the line and to see what's going on in Spartanburg, in South Carolina. I mean, I keep my ears open, my ears to the ground, if you will, and I know what's going on surface.
Yeah.
But it's important to know why these things are going on the surface. And you can't know that unless you get below the line.
This is a question before I ask my last question. South Carolina has a mandatory retirement. So in part, you had to retire because of your age. Would you have continued had you not? No. You would have still retired?
I would have retired regardless. My term ended on July 31st of this year, of a 10-year term, last year actually. I could have stayed on to this year had I wanted to.
Okay.
I didn't want to. In fact, I kind of think about it today and say I probably should have retired 10 years ago. But I couldn't.
Okay.
I wanted to, but I couldn't.
Okay.
There was just too many things going on that would have bothered other folk had I retired, if you will. I had a big push to keep me there.
It was a responsibility.
As a responsibility.
Yeah.
Being on the court became frustrating in the last 5-6 years, and I became disenchanted with the political pressures that the court was succumbing to.
Okay.
And I didn't want to be a part of that, quite frankly. Plus, at 72, it's time to go. It's time to do something else. I didn't want to spend all of my life doing that.
Yeah.
I wanted to be more impactful than I've been, if you will. Being a judge, you live in an isolated environment. You're in a bubble. Like I said before, I don't have a social media account. We're not supposed to have them, at least in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And here recently, some judges have gotten Facebook accounts, but usually with family members and those kinds of things. But we don't do Twitter. Shouldn't. And we don't have those kinds of accounts in South Carolina anyway. So that you shouldn't have a footprint in social media. And if you don't have a footprint in social media, we live a very isolated life. We only deal with certain people in certain environments. So you kind of lose touch with what's going on around you. Yeah. So you kind of are dependent upon what you see, what you hear in the newspaper, on the news, and what people might tell you otherwise.
Well, it's an awesome sense of responsibility and can be extremely lonely, I can imagine.
And that's another reason why I want to get back out into the public.
Okay. Do you have a hero? And if so, who?
I do not.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Growing up, we were taught, meaning in my household, you bow down to no man, you kneel to no man, you kneel to Jesus. Mm-hmm. God is it. None is to be placed above, so you don't idolize anyone. Okay. So I'll say I have admirers. Okay. I'll say that there are people through history that I've enjoyed reading about, but heroes, nah. If it's not a spiritual thing, I'll probably have to think about my grandmother.
Okay.
Who taught me I have to say my grandmother as well as my mother, who taught me about the importance of knowledge, reading, education, understanding things. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother would read, I guess, 2 or 3 newspapers a day. And she didn't have a high school education. I think she probably got to the 7th grade. Okay. She died at 94, and I don't think school might have gone to the 8th grade then. I'm not sure. But she was one of those who would sit me down and sit all of us down. There's 7 of us. Mm-hmm. 7 of us, and talk to us about what's going on in the world and why, as a result of what she was reading and that kind of thing. My mother, on the other hand, did something similar, but she was more literature was her interest. Reading. All the great writers, you name them, we were exposed to them. And in fact, didn't like most of it, but we did. And she had particular authors that she liked that we read, and I read in particular. And I might have read more than others because sometimes it was punishment for me because I was not the best behaved child, and reading was part of my punishment. So I think I might have read the whole works of the World Book Encyclopedia. Sitting down, you go read this, or you're bad today, you go sit over there. You didn't do your homework, go sit over there and you read this. So that kind of a thing. And I learned the importance of knowledge.
Excellent.
So I would say, that.
So what question would you ask Chief Justice Judge Beatty, Don Beatty, that I have not asked?
Well, that's a good one. That's a very good question. Growing up, my daddy used to tell us every day, well, what did you learn today? And if you couldn't tell him something you learned today, then he would say, you wasted a day. So I would go to bed every night thinking about, well, what did I learn today? And if I were to ask Don Beatty that today, I'll say it's too early in the day to ask. I'll wait till the end of the day and see, but I'll come up with something. Today? And if I don't, I'll do what I did when I was growing up. I get up, find me something to read, and say, I learned something today.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I guess that will be the question. That's one I have not answered yet.
Okay. Well, I look forward to spending time with you as you get close to answering that question. I got a feeling that we're going to see some big things that's going to be impactful from you. There's a lot inside that needs to come out.
Honestly, there is, and I've been just kind of putting it away until time. Now is the time. That's why I say it was time for me to retire.
Yeah.
So I can make that decision as to what am I going to do with some of that.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Benny. I really do appreciate it. I enjoyed it. Conversations like this are always enjoyable.
So I'm here with Chief Justice Don Beatty, retired, Below the Line. Thank you very much for another episode.
Thank you for having me.
The Below the Line podcast is brought to you by the University of South Carolina Upstate. Look for our monthly write-up in Greenville Business Magazine, and for more information, go to uscupstate.edu.